Imagine you are in your home late at night, a place where you are supposed to feel safe. Suddenly you hear a knock on your door, a hesitant but persistent tap that breaks the silence. You are not expecting anyone, and the hour is late, making the sound immediately unsettling. You look through the peephole and see two children standing on your porch, maybe 10 to 13 years old. They are dressed in simple, somewhat outdated clothing, and they just stand there in the dim porch light. You feel a strange sense of pity and concern, so you crack the door open just a little. One of them speaks, and their voice is surprisingly monotone and flat. They say they are lost and need to use your phone to call their parents. It seems like a reasonable request, a normal thing for a lost child to ask. But something feels deeply wrong, a cold dread that starts in your stomach and spreads through your entire body. You tell them you will make the call for them, that they can wait on the porch where it is safe. Their expression does not change, but their tone does, becoming more insistent. They say no, that is not good enough. They have to come inside. They need to be let in. It is at that moment that you finally really look into their eyes. They are not normal eyes. They are completely black, with no iris, no pupil, and no white sclera. They are just solid, soulless black orbs that seem to drink the light and reflect nothing back. The primal fear you felt before now has a name, and it is staring at you from the faces of these children. This is the classic encounter with the black-eyed children, a modern urban legend that has terrified people for decades. The stories share these core elements: the knock on the door, the strange request, the overwhelming fear, and the final horrifying reveal of their solid black eyes. Are these genuine encounters with some unknown entity, or are they a product of our collective imagination? Is this a real phenomenon, or is it simply a case of mass hallucination fueled by the internet? To understand the black-eyed children, we have to go back to the beginning, to the very first documented case that started it all. The story originates not from some ancient folklore book, but from the early days of the internet. The year was 1996, and a journalist from Texas named Brian Bethel decided to share a disturbing experience he had. He posted his story on a Ghost Watchers mailing list, a small online community for people interested in the paranormal. He never intended for it to become a global phenomenon. He just wanted to see if anyone had experienced something similar. Little did he know, his personal account would become the foundation for one of the most enduring horror legends of the digital age. Bethel's story is the patient zero of the black-eyed children mythos. He was sitting in his car one evening, parked outside a movie theater in Abilene, Texas, writing a check to pay a bill. His car was the only one in that section of the parking lot, illuminated by a single streetlight. It was a quiet, mundane moment that was about to be shattered. He heard a knock on his driver's side window, and he looked up to see two young boys. He estimated they were somewhere between 9 and 12 years old. One boy was slightly taller than the other, and they both had olive complexions and dark hair. They were dressed in simple pullovers, and Bethel was immediately struck by a sense of unease. The taller boy spoke first, explaining that they had a problem. He told Bethel that they wanted to see a movie, but they had left their money at home. They asked him for a ride to their house so they could get the money and come back. It was a strange request, but the boy's calm, articulate way of speaking was even stranger. Bethel felt an overwhelming wave of irrational fear, a fight-or-flight response that he could not explain. He wrote that his mind was screaming at him, telling him to get away, to roll up the window and drive off as fast as he could. He looked at the boys, trying to figure out what was so terrifying about them. He noticed their clothes were clean but plain, and their haircuts were simple. His logical mind was telling him they were just two kids who needed help, but his instincts were telling him he was in terrible danger. He fumbled for his wallet, thinking he could just give them the money for the movie, and they would leave. As he did this, he tried to make eye contact, and that is when he saw it. Their eyes were completely black, devoid of any color or light. He described them as having no pupils, no irises, just two solid, coal-black orbs staring at him. The sight was so shocking, so unnatural, that it paralyzed him for a moment. All the fear he had been feeling suddenly made sense. It was a primal reaction to something profoundly not human. He wrote that the eyes were like a shark's eyes, like the eyes on a doll, utterly without soul. The boys seemed to notice his terror, but their expressions remained blank. The taller boy leaned in closer, his voice becoming more insistent and demanding. He said they could not get in his car until he told them it was okay. They needed to be invited in. This detail, the need for permission, is a recurring theme in many paranormal encounters, from vampires to demons. It was this statement that finally broke Bethel's paralysis. He ripped the check he was writing from his checkbook, threw the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot. He looked back in his rearview mirror and saw that the boys were gone. They had vanished as if they were never there. Brian Bethel's story, posted in the relative obscurity of an online mailing list, quickly spread. People copied and pasted it onto other forums, websites, and eventually social media. It became what we now call a creepypasta, a horror legend passed around the internet. But what made it so powerful was Bethel's identity. He was a respected journalist, not an anonymous teenager looking for attention. He stood by his story, maintaining for decades that what he experienced was real. His detailed, sober account gave the legend a sense of credibility that most internet stories lack. After his story went public, other people started coming forward with their own encounters. The black-eyed children were no longer just Brian Bethel's personal nightmare. They were a shared one. The stories that followed often mirrored Bethel's experience with uncanny precision. The pattern was almost always the same: a knock at the door or on a car window late at night. The children appear, usually in pairs, looking ordinary at first glance. They make a simple request: to be let inside to use the phone or to get a drink of water. The victim feels an intense, unexplainable sense of dread and terror. And then comes the reveal of the solid black eyes, followed by the children's increasingly forceful demands to be invited in. Let us examine the anatomy of these encounters in more detail, because the consistency is one of the most fascinating aspects of this phenomenon. The setting is almost always a liminal space, a threshold between the safe world and the unknown. A front door, a car window, the edge of a campsite, these are all boundaries. The black-eyed children appear at these boundaries and ask for permission to cross them. This creates a powerful psychological tension. The safety of your home or your vehicle is being directly challenged. You are the gatekeeper, and the decision to open the gate or keep it shut feels like a matter of life and death. The request itself is also masterfully deceptive. It plays on our social conditioning to help children in need. We are taught from a young age that we should be kind to children to protect them from harm. The black-eyed children use this instinct against us. Their request for help is a Trojan horse. It lures you into a position of vulnerability before you realize the danger you are in. The feeling of overwhelming dread is another crucial component, and it often comes before the victim even sees the eyes. People report a sudden, gut-wrenching terror that makes no logical sense. It is a primal, animalistic fear, the kind a prey animal feels when a predator is near. This suggests that on some subconscious level, the victim recognizes that they are not dealing with a normal human being. This precognitive fear is a common element in many paranormal reports. It is the body's alarm system, screaming that something is fundamentally wrong with reality. Then comes the centerpiece of the entire phenomenon, the eyes. The complete and total blackness of their eyes is the ultimate violation of what we expect to see in a human face. Our eyes are called the windows to the soul for a reason. They are expressive and communicate a vast range of emotions. The eyes of the black-eyed children communicate nothing but a void, an emptiness that feels malevolent. The lack of a sclera, the white part of the eye, is what makes them so terrifyingly alien. It removes any last trace of humanity from their appearance. Finally, there is the insistence, the refusal to take no for an answer. When the victim denies their request, the children do not simply go away. Their calm demeanor often breaks, and they become more aggressive, more demanding. They repeat their need to be let in. Their voice is sometimes described as becoming deeper or more menacing. This escalation of pressure is a form of psychological warfare. It wears down the victim's resolve, making them question their decision to refuse help to what still outwardly appear to be children. The aftermath of an encounter is also significant. Witnesses often report feeling shaken for days, weeks, or even years afterward. They experience paranoia, a lingering sense of being watched, and a deep-seated fear of being alone at night. Some have even reported subsequent bad luck, illness, or other paranormal activity in their homes. Now that we have established the template, let us look at some other specific accounts. These stories, gathered from forums, blogs, and paranormal websites, show how the legend has evolved and adapted over time. One widely circulated story comes from a man who was living in a rural area. He was at home one snowy evening with his wife when they heard a knock on the door. It was close to midnight, and a blizzard was raging outside, so any visitor at that hour was highly unusual. The man looked through the peephole and saw two small children, a boy and a girl, shivering in the snow. Feeling a surge of compassion, he opened the door and asked what they were doing out in such a storm. The boy, who looked to be around 12, spoke in a strangely calm voice. He said their car had broken down and they needed to come inside to get warm and call for help. The man's wife, standing behind him, immediately felt a wave of fear. She told her husband not to let them in, that something was wrong. The man was torn. He could not just leave two children to freeze to death. He looked closer at them, and that is when he noticed their eyes. They were completely black, just like in Brian Bethel's story. A cold terror washed over him, and he slammed the door shut, locking it. The children did not react with surprise or disappointment. They just stood there. Then the boy's voice came through the door, no longer calm but filled with a cold rage. He said they would not leave until they were invited in, that they had to be let in. The couple retreated from the door, terrified, and watched from a window as the children stood on their porch for what felt like hours. They did not move, they did not shiver, they just stared at the house. Eventually, the man and his wife fell asleep from sheer exhaustion and fear. When they woke up the next morning, the children were gone, but there were no footprints in the deep snow on their porch or leading up to their house. It was as if the children had never been there at all, except for the lingering, suffocating fear they left behind. Another common type of encounter happens in a car, similar to Bethel's original story. A woman shared an account of driving home late one night through a deserted back road. Her car suddenly sputtered and died, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone signal. She was panicking when she saw headlights approaching from behind. A car pulled up, and she was relieved until she saw it was an old black windowless van. Two teenagers got out and walked towards her car. They looked to be about 16 or 17 years old. They tapped on her window and asked if she needed help. She was hesitant, but she was also desperate. She rolled down the window a crack and explained her situation. They offered to give her a ride to the next town. She was about to agree when she looked into the driver's eyes. They were solid black, and a feeling of absolute terror seized her. She screamed and rolled up her window, locking her doors. The teenagers' friendly demeanor vanished instantly. They started banging on her window, their faces contorted with anger, shouting that she had to let them in, that she had to come with them. She laid on her horn, hoping to scare them away or attract attention. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, they suddenly stopped, got back in their van, and drove away. A few moments later, her car started up again for no apparent reason. She drove home, never looking back, and she said she never took that back road again. These stories, and hundreds like them, form the modern folklore of the black-eyed children. But now we must ask the critical question posed by our title: are these encounters real, or are we experiencing a form of mass hallucination? Let us first explore the skeptical, scientific explanations for this phenomenon. The human brain is a powerful and often unreliable narrator of reality. It is designed to find patterns and make sense of the world, but sometimes it gets things wrong. One of the most prominent psychological explanations for encounters with the black-eyed children is related to sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations. Hypnagogic hallucinations occur in the state between wakefulness and sleep. Your body is falling asleep, but your mind is still partially conscious. During this state, it is common to experience vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. You might hear voices, see figures in your room, or feel a sense of pressure or dread. Many black-eyed children encounters happen at home, late at night, when a person is in bed or resting. It is entirely plausible that a person on the verge of sleep could dream up the entire scenario. They might hear a knocking sound generated by their own mind, and then hallucinate the figures of children at their door or in their room. The intense fear associated with these encounters is also a hallmark of sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, your body is temporarily paralyzed while your mind is awake. This can be an incredibly terrifying experience, often accompanied by a sense of a malevolent presence in the room. It is easy to see how the brain, in this state of fear and confusion, could project the image of a black-eyed child. The image itself could be drawn from stories the person has read or heard online. Another psychological principle at play is pareidolia, the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. This is why we see faces in clouds or the man in the moon. It is possible that in a low-light situation, looking at a child's face through a peephole or a car window, the brain could misinterpret the shadows. The pupils might be naturally dilated in the dark, making the iris less visible. The brain, already primed by a sense of fear or by knowledge of the legend, could fill in the gaps and perceive the eyes as being solid black. This is not a conscious decision. It is an automatic process of pattern recognition gone slightly wrong. This leads us to the power of suggestion and confirmation bias. Once a story like Brian Bethel's becomes widely known, it creates a template in our collective consciousness. If someone has a strange, frightening experience that they cannot explain, their brain might latch onto the black-eyed children narrative as a way to make sense of it. They might retroactively fit the details of their experience to match the established legend. They might remember the person's eyes as being darker than they really were, or they might exaggerate the feeling of dread they felt. This is not necessarily lying. It is how memory works. It is reconstructive, not a perfect recording. The internet acts as a massive echo chamber for these stories. When someone posts a new account, it is read by thousands of people, reinforcing the belief in the phenomenon. This creates a feedback loop. The more stories are told, the more real the black-eyed children seem. The more real they seem, the more likely people are to interpret their own ambiguous experiences as encounters with them. We can also look at the black-eyed children through the lens of modern folklore and sociology. They are a perfect example of a digital urban legend or a creepypasta. Unlike old folktales that were passed down orally over generations, these stories spread at the speed of light through the internet. They mutate and evolve with each retelling, but the core elements remain the same. The black-eyed children share many characteristics with older mythological creatures. The need to be invited in, for example, is a classic attribute of vampires. This trope plays on the ancient belief that a home is a sacred, protected space, and a supernatural entity cannot cross the threshold without the owner's permission. By incorporating this familiar element, the legend gains a sense of timeless authority. The black-eyed children also bear a resemblance to the Fae or fairies of European folklore. Fae were often depicted as tricky, amoral beings who would sometimes appear in human form to lure people away. They were known for their strange eyes and their ability to instill irrational fear. The stories of changelings, where fairies would steal a human baby and leave a sickly Fae creature in its place, also echo the theme of something inhuman disguised as a child. The child archetype itself is incredibly powerful in horror. Children are supposed to be symbols of innocence and vulnerability. When that archetype is twisted into something malevolent and threatening, it creates a deep sense of psychological discomfort. It subverts our expectations and taps into our deepest fears about the corruption of innocence. So, from a skeptical viewpoint, the black-eyed children are not real entities. They are a potent cocktail of psychological quirks, the power of suggestion, and the dynamics of modern digital folklore. They are a meme, a viral idea that has taken root in our culture because it is so effective at scaring us. The thousands of anecdotal accounts are not evidence of a real phenomenon, but rather a testament to the power of a good story to shape our perception of reality. But what if the skeptical explanation is not the whole story? What if we entertain the possibility that these encounters are real? If thousands of people across the world are having remarkably similar experiences, can we dismiss it all as hallucination or folklore? Let us now explore the paranormal side of the argument, the idea that these are real encounters with something unknown. If the black-eyed children are real, then what are they? This is where the theories become even more varied and fascinating. One of the most popular paranormal theories is that they are demonic entities. In this interpretation, the children are not children at all, but demons taking on a non-threatening form to gain access to a person's home and soul. The black eyes are seen as a sign of their demonic nature, a window into their soulless, malevolent essence. The need to be invited in fits perfectly with the idea that demons require permission or a sign of weakness to exert their influence. Their goal in this view could be to feed on fear, to cause chaos, or to possess the victim. The lingering negative effects reported after an encounter, such as bad luck and illness, are seen as evidence of a demonic attachment. Another compelling theory is that the black-eyed children are related to aliens. The classic image of a grey alien includes large, black, almond-shaped eyes. Perhaps the black-eyed children are alien-human hybrids, part of some clandestine genetic experiment. Their purpose could be to observe humanity, to test our reactions, or to abduct individuals for their own inscrutable purposes. This theory would explain their strange monotone voices and their lack of emotional expression. It could also explain their sudden appearances and disappearances, suggesting they have access to advanced technology. The car encounters in particular lend some credence to this idea. The stories of cars stalling and then restarting, and the children appearing on deserted roads, feel more like a science fiction trope than a demonic one. A third theory, rooted more in spiritualism and ghost lore, is that they are some kind of vampiric entity. Not the blood-sucking vampires of fiction, but psychic vampires. These entities would feed not on blood, but on life force or emotional energy. The intense fear generated during an encounter would be a feast for them. This would explain why they do not physically harm the victims. Their goal is to terrify them. The black eyes could be a physical manifestation of their energy-draining nature. The need to be invited in also works with this theory, as it establishes a connection that allows them to feed. Once you let them in, you are giving them permission to take what they want. Some people have suggested a more tragic interpretation, that the black-eyed children are the lost souls of children who died traumatic deaths. Their black eyes could be a symbol of their lost innocence or the darkness of their passing. In this view, they are not necessarily malevolent, but they are trapped and desperate. Their insistence on being let in could be a cry for help, a desire to find a new home or a new family. However, this theory does not fully account for the overwhelming sense of dread and evil that most witnesses report. If they were just lost souls, you might expect to feel pity, not primal terror. A more esoteric theory posits that the black-eyed children are interdimensional beings. They are entities from another reality or another plane of existence that are temporarily bleeding into our own. This could explain their strange appearance and behavior, as they would be operating under a different set of physical and social laws. The liminal spaces where they appear, the thresholds and boundaries, could be weak spots in the fabric of reality where such crossovers are more likely to occur. Their purpose would be completely unknowable to us. As alien as their solid black eyes, they might not even be aware of the terror they are causing. Proponents of the paranormal explanation point to the sheer number and consistency of the reports as their primary evidence. They argue that it is statistically unlikely for so many different people from different backgrounds and cultures to independently hallucinate the exact same thing. They also point to cases where there were multiple witnesses to the same event. For example, the husband and wife who both saw the children on their porch during the blizzard. While one person might hallucinate, it is much harder to dismiss the shared experience of two or more people. This suggests that there was an objective event that took place, something that existed outside of their individual minds. Furthermore, paranormal investigators have tried to document physical evidence. There are stories of strange electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, being captured during alleged encounters. Some have reported finding strange smudges on doors or windows where the children were standing. However, this type of evidence is often difficult to verify and is easily dismissed by skeptics. The core of the paranormal argument rests on the strength of the anecdotal evidence. It asks us to trust the testimony of the witnesses, to believe that they are not all lying, mistaken, or hallucinating. It requires a leap of faith, a willingness to accept that there are things in this world that we do not understand. For those who have experienced it firsthand, the debate is over. They know what they saw. So we are left with two compelling but mutually exclusive narratives. On one hand, the black-eyed children are a fascinating case study in modern folklore and psychology. On the other hand, they are a terrifying and potentially real paranormal phenomenon. Is there any way to reconcile these two opposing views? Perhaps there is a third option. a middle ground that is in some ways even more strange than the other two. This is the concept of the tulpa, or the egregore. This is an idea found in some esoteric and occult traditions. It suggests that a thought or an idea, if given enough focused energy and belief by a large group of people, can take on a life of its own. It can become a thought form, an autonomous psychic entity that can begin to manifest in the physical world. In this view, the black-eyed children may not have been real to begin with, but Brian Bethel's story was so powerful, and it was spread to so many people through the internet, that our collective belief and fear acted like an engine. We, as a culture, have poured so much energy into the idea of the black-eyed children that we may have inadvertently willed them into existence. This theory elegantly combines both the skeptical and the paranormal explanations. It acknowledges that the phenomenon began as a story, a product of the human mind. But it also allows for the possibility that the encounters are now objectively real. The egregore, once created, can act independently and interact with people in the real world. It would explain the consistency of the encounters, because the egregore is based on the original template of the story. It needs to be invited in because that is part of its founding myth. It has solid black eyes because that is its most defining and terrifying feature. It feeds on fear because it is literally made of our collective fear. This is a deeply unsettling idea because it implies that our own thoughts and fears can create real-world monsters. It suggests that the internet is not just an echo chamber for stories, but a magical incubator for them. If we can create the black-eyed children with our belief, what other horrors are we currently dreaming into reality? This theory places the responsibility for the phenomenon squarely back on us. It is a warning about the power of stories and the danger of unchecked fear. It is a modern ghost story for the digital age, where our nightmares can go viral and then climb out of the screen. Ultimately, there is no definitive answer to the question of what the black-eyed children are. There is no hard evidence, no captured specimen, no scientific paper that can prove or disprove their existence. All we have are the stories, the thousands of unsettling accounts from ordinary people who found themselves face to face with something they could not explain. We have the goosebumps on our skin when we read about a late-night knock on the door. We have the lingering image of those solid, black, soulless eyes. Whether you choose to believe in the psychological explanation, the paranormal theories, or the strange middle ground of the egregore, the phenomenon remains one of the most compelling mysteries of our time. It reflects our deep-seated fears about the unknown, about the safety of our homes, and about the nature of humanity itself. The stories force us to confront the possibility that the world is not as safe and predictable as we like to think. They remind us that there may be things lurking in the shadows, just beyond the glow of our streetlights and our computer screens. Things that look almost human, but are not. And they are waiting for you to make one simple mistake. They are waiting for you to open the door and let them in. So the next time you hear an unexpected knock late at night, you might pause for a moment. You might feel a flicker of that same primal fear that Brian Bethel felt in his car all those years ago. And you might find yourself asking the same question that has haunted thousands of others. What is really out there, and what does it want from me? The debate will likely continue for as long as the stories are told. New encounters will be reported, new theories will be proposed, and the legend of the black-eyed children will continue to evolve. They have become a permanent fixture in our modern mythology, a chilling reminder that some questions may never have answers, and perhaps that is the most frightening part of all. The not knowing is what keeps the legend alive, what gives it its power. It is the uncertainty that makes us lock our doors a little tighter at night. So, are they real, or are they a mass hallucination? The final answer may depend on what you are willing to believe and what you are prepared to see when you look out into the darkness.